The music stops. 20,000 voices fall silent. Elvis Presley stands center stage, microphone hanging loose in his hand. His eyes lock onto something in the crowd. Something that makes the king of rock and roll forget he's performing. A child. Crying. Reaching up toward the stage with trembling hands. Elvis drops the microphone. It hits the floor with a metallic crash that echoes through the stunned arena. He walks to the edge of the stage. Kneels down. And in front of 20,000 people, whispers something that makes everyone in the front row start crying. This was July 26, 1977. Las Vegas. The last time Elvis would ever speak on stage. And what happened next would change everyone who witnessed it forever. But how did we get to this moment? How did a routine concert become the most heartbreaking performance in music history? Let me take you back to the beginning of that night. July 26, 1977. The International Hotel, Las Vegas. Elvis was scheduled to perform his usual set list. Love Me Tender, Hound Dog, Can't Help Falling in Love, songs he performed thousands of times before. But something was different that night. Elvis seemed more reflective, more present than usual. His band noticed it during soundcheck. His backup singers whispered about it backstage. There was an energy in the air, like electricity before a storm. At 8:30 p.m., the lights dimmed. 20,000 fans erupted as Elvis took the stage in his iconic white jumpsuit, cape flowing behind him like wings. He opened with CC Rider, his voice as powerful as ever, but his eyes were scanning the crowd more intently than usual. 3 songs in, during Love Me Tender, Elvis's gaze found someone in the front row. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, wearing a small Superman cape over his shoulders. The child was thin, pale, and had the unmistakable look of someone fighting a battle much bigger than his small frame should have to bear. The boy's mother stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. She held a small sign that read, "Elvis, please sing for my son Tommy. It's his dream." Elvis caught sight of the sign. His voice wavered slightly on the next line. The band continued playing, but something shifted in Elvis's demeanor. He finished the song, but his attention kept drifting back to Tommy and his mother. Elvis suddenly stopped singing mid-verse during Heartbreak Hotel. The band scrambled to catch up, confusion spreading across their faces as 20,000 people held their breath. "Hold on, boys," Elvis said softly into the microphone, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying through the entire arena. "Just hold on a minute." The music stopped completely. An eerie silence fell over the massive venue. You could hear people shifting in their seats, the distant hum of air conditioning, someone's nervous cough. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, directly above where Tommy and his mother stood. He crouched down, his cape pulling around him like white silk. "What's your name, son?" Elvis asked, his voice gentle but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Tommy," the boy replied, his voice small but brave. "Tommy what?" "Tommy Morrison, sir." "Well, Tommy Morrison, I hear you're a big fan." The boy nodded vigorously, his Superman cape fluttering with emotion. Elvis turned to his guitar player. "Charlie, bring me that acoustic." Charlie Hodge quickly brought over Elvis's acoustic guitar, the same one he'd used to write some of his most personal songs. Elvis stood up, cradling the instrument, and something magical happened. He began to sing, "It's Now or Never," but not the way anyone had ever heard it before. This wasn't the polished, powerful version from his albums. This was intimate, vulnerable, like he was singing directly to Tommy's soul. As Elvis sang, Tommy began to cry. Not from sadness, but from pure joy. His mother wrapped her arms around him, and soon, the people around them were crying too. Backstage, Elvis's manager Colonel Parker was frantically trying to get his attention, but Elvis was completely focused on Tommy. The arena staff, security guards, even the backup singers, everyone watched in stunned silence as the king transformed a concert into something sacred. When Elvis finished the song, he did something no one expected. He carefully removed a silk scarf from around his neck, one he'd worn during dozens of performances, and held it out to Tommy. "This is for you, son. Every time you look at it, I want you to remember that you're the bravest person I've ever met." Tommy reached up with shaking hands to accept the scarf. As he touched it, Elvis leaned down and whispered something in the boy's ear. Something private. Something just for him. The arena was dead silent except for the sound of people crying. Elvis stood up, guitar still in hand, and did something unprecedented. He began speaking to the entire audience, not as Elvis the performer, but as Elvis the human being. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we get so caught up in our own lives, our own problems, that we forget there are people out there fighting battles we can't even imagine. That little boy right there." Elvis pointed to Tommy. "He's teaching all of us what real courage looks like." He paused, looking around the arena at 20,000 faces hanging on his every word. Music is supposed to heal. It's supposed to bring us together. And sometimes, just sometimes, if we're lucky enough, it gets to do exactly that." Elvis sat down on the edge of the stage, his legs hanging over like he was sitting on a porch. The most famous entertainer in the world, making himself small and accessible. "Tommy," he called down, "you want to hear another song?" The boy nodded eagerly. "What's your favorite?" "Can't Help Falling in Love," Tommy called back, his voice stronger now. Elvis smiled, that crooked, genuine smile that had made millions of hearts flutter, and began to play. But this time, something unprecedented happened. Tommy began to sing along. His small voice, clear and pure, rose up from the crowd. And then, one by one, people around him joined in. First the front row. Then the section behind them. Then the entire arena. 20,000 voices singing together, led by a dying child and the king of rock and roll. But here's the incredible part nobody expected. The part that would change everything. Elvis began to cry. Not the controlled emotion of a performer, but real, raw tears of a man whose heart was breaking and healing at the same time. He continued playing through his tears, his voice cracking on some notes. But somehow the imperfection made it more beautiful. More human. More real than any polished performance could ever be. When the song ended, Elvis stood up and carefully climbed down from the stage. Security started to move toward him, but he waved them off. He walked directly to Tommy and knelt down again, this time on the arena floor, at eye level with the boy. They talked for several minutes. The audience remained completely silent, respecting this private moment happening in full view of thousands. Some conversations are too sacred to interrupt, even in public. When Elvis finally stood up, he helped Tommy climb onto the stage. The boy, still wearing his Superman cape and now clutching Elvis's scarf, stood next to his hero as 20,000 people gave them a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Elvis took the microphone one final time that night. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his arm around Tommy's shoulders, "I want you to meet the real Superman." He looked down at Tommy. "You want to finish the show with me, son?" Tommy nodded, and together they sang, "Love Me Tender," as the finale. Elvis's powerful voice blending with Tommy's innocent one, creating something that transcended music and became pure emotion. When the song ended, Elvis knelt down one more time and whispered something else in Tommy's ear. Then he kissed the boy's forehead, and Tommy walked back to his mother, carrying Elvis's scarf like it was made of gold. Elvis stood alone on the stage for a moment, looking out at the crowd. He picked up the microphone for the last time and said words that would haunt everyone who heard them. "Thank you. For everything. For letting me share this with you. For reminding me why I do this. Sometimes the most important performances aren't the ones we plan." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "Sometimes they're the ones that choose us." Elvis bowed deeply, his cape flowing around him, and walked off stage for the final time. 3 weeks later, on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead at Graceland. That night in Las Vegas had been his final performance. But the story doesn't end there. Tommy Morrison fought his illness for 6 more months. His mother later said that he carried Elvis's scarf with him everywhere, to doctor appointments, to the hospital, even to bed. He would hold it during the difficult treatments and tell nurses about the night Elvis sang just for him. Tommy passed away in February 1978, still holding that scarf. At his funeral, his mother played a recording of that final performance. Someone in the audience that night had captured the audio on a small cassette recorder. You can hear Tommy's voice mixing with Elvis's, 20,000 people crying and singing together, and Elvis's final words from the stage. The scarf was buried with Tommy, along with a note from his mother that read, "Thank you, Elvis, for giving my son the greatest night of his life. You showed him what it means to be truly loved." Years later, musicians would talk about that performance as the moment they understood the true power of music. Not to entertain, but to heal. Not to impress, but to connect. Not to perform, but to serve. But there's more to this story that few people know. In the months following that performance, something extraordinary began happening at Elvis concerts across the country. Fans started bringing handmade signs, not asking for autographs or attention, but sharing their own struggles. "My daughter is fighting cancer. My husband came back from Vietnam different. I lost my job and don't know how to feed my family." Elvis's band members noticed he began reading every single sign during his performances. He would pause between songs, scan the audience, and acknowledge people individually. Sometimes he'd call out to someone in the crowd, other times he'd simply nod in their direction. But he saw them. All of them. His guitarist, James Burton, later revealed that Elvis started carrying a small notebook backstage. After every show, he would write down the names and stories he'd learned from the audience. He kept that notebook until the day he died, filled with hundreds of names and brief descriptions. Maria, front row, lost her son in car accident. David, section C, unemployed father of 3. Susan, balcony, caring for mother with Alzheimer's. The scarf he gave to Tommy that night started something else entirely. Word spread through Elvis's fan network about the boy and his Superman cape. Fans began sending scarves, toys, and letters to children's hospitals across the country, all signed, "From a friend of Elvis." The movement grew quietly, without publicity or fanfare, touching thousands of young lives. Dr. Patricia Williams, who worked at St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis during that time, remembered, "We started receiving packages every week. Beautiful silk scarves, small Elvis records, handwritten notes of encouragement. The return address would just say a friend. It took us months to realize it was all connected to that final concert." Elvis's backup singer, Kathy Westmoreland, said it best. "That night, Elvis wasn't the king of rock and roll. He was just a man with a guitar, singing to a little boy. And somehow, that made him more royal than any crown ever could." The ripple effects of that single moment continued long after both Elvis and Tommy were gone. Tommy's mother, Sarah Morrison, eventually became a volunteer at children's hospitals, bringing music therapy to young patients. She would tell Tommy's story and play that recording of Elvis's final performance. Many of those children would later say that hearing about the night the King stopped his show for one little boy gave them hope during their darkest moments. Subscribe and share this story if it moved you. Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we stop performing and start being human. The legacy of that night lives on in every musician who stops mid-song to connect with their audience, in every performer who remembers that behind every face in the crowd is a human being with hopes, dreams, and battles they're fighting. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the 20,000 people who witnessed that moment. Many of them would later say it changed how they viewed not just Elvis, but humanity itself. They had seen genuine compassion in action, watched as fame and fortune took a backseat to simple human kindness. Concert attendee Margaret Chin, who was sitting in the third row that night, later became a pediatric nurse. She often told her young patients Tommy's story, explaining how sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in a bottle, but in the connection between two hearts. "Elvis taught me that healing doesn't always come from what we take," she would say, "but from what we give." The audio recording of that final performance became legendary among collectors, but Sarah Morrison never sold it. Instead, she donated copies to music therapy programs worldwide. Today, Therapists use Tommy and Elvis's duet as an example of music's ability to transcend pain and create moments of pure joy even in the darkest circumstances. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, maybe Elvis and Tommy are still singing together. Two souls who met for one perfect moment and reminded 20,000 people what love actually sounds like. That's the power of music. That's the power of compassion. And that's why, 47 years later, we're still talking about the final time Elvis spoke on stage. Because he didn't just speak. He listened. He saw. He cared. And in doing so, he gave us all a master class in what it means to be human.